Armored Warfare. There we go. So, what we've seen from games such as Armored Warfare is when a PvE game modes are added, the population from the PvE, and they're added with a situation where it's actually, given similar rewards to the PvP side of things. What you will find is your PvP part of the game will die. And then what will happen is your game eventually will die, or at least the player base will shrink a hell of a lot, because you first of all, in PvE game modes, if they're very similar to each other, if you set up campaign missions or if you set up certain ways of playing which are very simple to do, either people are going to get bored of it or they're going to start botting, and they're just going to write scripts, or some people are going to write scripts for money where you can just pretty much just go through them without even thinking. So you're going to auto grind the game, you're going to be able to research everything, and then you're either going to be able to play it or sell your account. So this means that the value of research is completely meaningless for the game. On top of this as well, the reason why it kills the PvP game mode is because everybody will be playing the PvE game mode because it's just easier. And something that I saw in War Thunder, which was really troubling, when the Phantom came out. So the American Phantom came out, and I was sat on the Discord quite a lot because I wanted to hear people's opinions on it. I wanted to hear what they thought about the grind. I wanted to hear what they thought about what modifications or key. I got none of that. What actually happened was, and this is something I've been talking about for a year, which is a real problem. So if you didn't know, in Simulator, in the Enduring Confrontation, you have the ability to create your own rooms. Now, this isn't a bad thing. This is actually a great thing. It means that you can use it to play the missions you want. It means that you can create areas where you can learn how to fly sim, and you can also, join rooms instead of having to go through the general matchmaking, which means that you don't have to, wait. You can just pop into a match that you want to play. All of these things are wonderful. There's an exploit, though. And the exploit is, because you can create your own rooms, and because you only need 4 people overall to start a match, what people were doing, and still doing to this day, even after, the RP reductions to stuff like base bombing and stuff like that, was they were setting up these missions with 2 people on either side. They would create the mission, go into it, 2 people would leave the one side of the simulator battle, and then it would just leave an open, free Simulatory C campaign for the 2 people who were left. And they were doing this over and over again, and I was asking them why they were doing this. And it was because it meant that they didn't have to face anybody, they didn't have to play against other players, and they could just freely gain experience and RP for their Phantoms to spade them out. Now, imagine if everybody did that. Imagine if you had a situation where the whole community, when a new vehicle came out, and just imagine now that Ground had a similar game mode as well. Imagine if everybody did that. That would mean that queue times in the PvP areas would just be done. They wouldn't exist because nobody would actually be playing. They would be infinite. Then you would only have people who had the spaded vehicles from these simulator modes, or people who'd golded through them who were playing it. So you'd have no natural progression when it comes to actually playing the game modes. And what would happen is it would just kill the game. and that's what we've seen from other games, such as Armored Warfare. So for me, I like the idea of PvE, but it can never, ever be on the scale of the PvP game modes when it comes to rewards or when it comes to general gameplay. Otherwise, you will just kill them because people will always take the easy way out when it comes to these games. And whether that's good or whether that's bad, there are plenty of games out there that you can play PvE. War Thunder at its base is a PvP game. If you want to play the PvE stuff, there are many opportunities to do it through single missions, through dynamic campaigns, through user missions, and all of this stuff. But from a grinding perspective, from a research perspective, it has to stay PvP. Because once you add in the PvE game mode, The people who benefit are not these lower tier helicopters. The people who benefit are the higher tier ones, who are going to get the missiles, and then they're just going to go in and annihilate everything still in those game modes. Overnight, you would kill the PvP part of helicopters. Now, it's already pretty much dead, but you would fully kill it. So you might as well just make the whole thing PvE. Would there be any possibility of adding more lower tier helicopters that do not have access to missile or rocket armaments like the H-1G? Instead, they would be armed with guns and or bombs providing support from the air. The answer is such vehicles will have a low battle efficiency, and because of this, expansion of the helicopter trees in this way isn't planned yet. Yeah, they would. They would just fly around and do nothing. There is the idea that you could have these helicopters to scout with. This was an idea that was popularized about a year ago when people were trying to work out what was the point of helicopters existing in the game if they didn't have ATGMs on them. And the answer was, at that time, and still is at this time, there isn't a reason. So the fact is, you could add a bunch of very low tier helicopters which don't have a lot of armaments. At the same time, the way I'm seeing it is if I have, let's say, 3 or 4 of them on my team, then I'm sat in a situation where, yes, people are having fun flying around their helicopters, but I'm 3 or 4 people down on a team. It would be the same as if you added APCs to the game, which only had a 50 cal on it at 6.7. What you are pretty much doing is you're setting up a vehicle which wouldn't really be able to do much against a team which probably will have 3 more medium tanks than you. The overall issue with stuff like this is the same issue that War Thunder will always have, and it's something that World of Tanks and other games don't have, because of the fact that in War Thunder you have a multi-vehicle lineup when it comes to ground, when it comes to naval, when it comes to simulator. What it means is you cannot just match make vehicle versus vehicle. You cannot just say, like how World of Tanks do, you know, if you're in a tier 7, you're either going to meet a tier 8, 7, or 6, and they're also going to throw in some caveats like, you know, so many heavy tanks per side, so many mediums, so many lights. None of that can exist in War Thunder because of the fact that you are matchmaking a lineup instead of just a single vehicle. So, because of that, we always have to take into consideration that battle composition can screw your team over from the start, and it's much better to limit that instead of trying to expand it, because otherwise you'll see situations like you did about a month ago or half a month ago with stuff like the M1A2, where it had a ridiculous win rate. It was either 70 or 80%, because people were taking out a lot of helicopters for the Soviets, and they weren't killing enough, and the M1A2s were just running around, capping points, and then going to spawn camp. The same reason why, you know, the Leopard 2A5 finally met its match, because America once again got the top tier, not just in helicopters and aviation and ground, but also a tank, and also the ADATs. Like, it's they just ran over everything, and they're still doing it. It's the main reason why the XM1 went up. It had like a 70% win rate. It's the main reason why, you know, everybody's playing America right now, because they're crazy, crazy good. Naval-wise, so there's a lot here, which is great. The first one is the HMS Hawkins is outclassed by all other same rank heavy cruisers. She's a World War I ship fighting mostly modernized World War II cruisers. Why was the Hawkins selected? Welcome to a non-answer. The answer is actually the ship is like the founder of the heavy class of heavy cruisers, and we couldn't avoid it, and of course we're already working on more advanced British ships of this type. We couldn't avoid it. We're working on more advanced British ships. Translation. We know we fucked up. Don't worry, we're fixing it. So, right. The HMS Hawkings, I suppose you could definitely make an argument for it being one of the founding ships of, you know, of the heavy cruiser class. It is cool that we see it in game. The problem is you have many other machines from other nations which could also be seen as founding members of the heavy cruiser class. You chose not to add any of them, and instead go for the ridiculous ones from World War II. And this is the problem, isn't it? I suppose with the Pensacola, there was definitely a push towards this idea of a lighter vehicle. But the German ones, nah. Let's just throw in the Hipper, the Graf Spee, which are both World War II machines, if you look at when they were built. Oh, and also let's just throw in an Eugen as a premium. What, everybody's playing German right now? Why? Who knows? Maybe it's because they have 3 top-tier heavy cruisers. Who could have thought this? Why are people playing America ground? Well, maybe it's because they have a bunch of Abrams and an ADATs. Who would have thunk? Like, God, it's painful. But the fact is, when it comes to the HMS Hawkins, the problem is not the Hawkins, right? The Hawkins is actually a really good pick for the start of the heavy cruisers. The problem is the Hipper was selected, and the Hipper should not have been selected. Just like the Eugen should not have been selected, and the Graf Spee should have not been selected. They should have had a gradual increase into heavy cruisers. And I understand, yes, the arguments that Germany kind of skipped that area of heavy cruisers. Cool, no other nation did. Even the Soviets had some ships which were very similar to it. So therefore, just leave a few updates for the Germans. Give them a bunch of planes. Give them a bunch of ground vehicles. Give them a bunch of helicopters. But what you've got to do is you've got to do a natural progression. And instead what's happened, once again in naval, which seems to be the general trend in naval, is you have a situation now where one nation just has all of the nice toys and other nations don't have jack. And then you wonder why everybody is playing one nation, or why, the majority of the community is only playing 2 nations. Because it's not fun getting smashed in the face constantly, especially when you're trying to research these vehicles, and also you're trying to, get the modifications for them. Like, it's much easier for me to play something like the Hipper, or play something like the Brooklyn, and get my modifications on them, than it is something like the Hawkins. It's just much more interesting and much more fun, because I'm not having to slam my head against the wall to be able to do it. And that is the problem with stuff like the Hawkins. Because you've outclassed it by the fact that you added it at the same time as much more modern ships, it's already screwed from the start. And the thing is, you can't change that. Because of the way that the BRs are right now, and because of the ships that are involved, it's going to be at least a year before something like the Hawkins is even usable, because you'll add a bunch of heavy cruisers and battle cruisers, and then maybe it'll be down-tiered, or maybe the others will be up-tiered, such as the Hipper or the Graf Spee. But right now, that's not going to happen. So that's at least a year, and that is after it's already been released, before this thing is even going to be usable. And that's, hoping that it's going to be usable. So the problem is not the Hawkins. The problem is not the Pensacola. The problem is the German heavy cruisers. Kind of like when they added the Kern and the Nürnberg. Mainly the Kern, though. It was the same deal. It was the only thing that could actually annihilate whatever it saw. So yeah, very sad. Is it planned to rework the all-seeing ship captain's binoculars, or would it be even better to remove the selection using the X button at all? Is it too simple just to press X several times and the ship's captain will detect the enemy through all the bushes and trees and smoke? There are only such targets available that are in direct visibility or that are visible to your ally. So when it seems to you that the target is not visible for you, most likely the top of the mast are above the obstacle. Additionally, in Update 1.93, there was a bug of visibility calculation where, for ships at distance beyond a threshold, more than 10 kilometers, were not being checked for obstacles in the view line. Ships that appeared at a respawn and had a visual barrier between themselves and the enemy actually have been marked as detected. A translucent marker appeared in AB, and it was possible to shoot such targets, has been fixed. Perhaps for a purpose that isn't fully open to view, not fully visible, we'll introduce additional penalties for range detection and shooting. Yeah, just give everything visibility like you do in tanks, so they'll just pop in and out randomly as they do. But the main thing is, yeah, this this pretty much just says that what is being said here is wrong. So, next question. Is it planned to do anything about the current sinking system? Ships don't sink convincingly much of the time. Do you consider decreasing bilge pump efficiency? The answer is yes. We have some plans in this direction, but so far without any details. In general, our desire coincides with yours to make the look of majestic shipping ships appear more often for your eyes for our players. So yeah, I agree. It definitely, when a ship is sinking in game, it doesn't really look like it's sinking. It just kind of looks like it's existing and then decides to not exist. The only ones which look very dramatic are when it either falls over to its right or falls over to its left. And for me, it would be much more interesting if certain parts of the ship, such as the front or the back, actually got under the water and became unusable until you pumped out the water and, brought it back up. I think that would be very much more interesting than this kind of sway mentality or just randomly sinking, even if you're in a very, very large ship. So yeah, I agree. It would be nice to see graphically it look much more appealing. In an interview with MMORPG.com, Kirill Yudintsev announced a Sayeta-class gunboat, which was armed with anti-ship missiles, the Natuno, or Seakiller Mark I, on the screenshot. Can these rockets be first anti-ship missiles? The answer is, such anti-ship missiles are possible, but for its usage, you will need additional control and countermeasure systems. So we can say the final word only after internal tests. Yeah, anti-ship missiles. So when in ground forces, when ATGMs were added. Now, this is actually really nice that they're actually thinking of this, because when ATGMs were added, they were in a much different state to what they are now. You could actually curve them around buildings. You could do ridiculous things with them. Smoke didn't exist in the game. And also, it was much easier to free aim them. The whole idea of this wired ATGM system didn't really matter. It didn't really exist physically in the game, so you could pull off ridiculous stuff. And this normally came in the form of the IT-1 and the Rakuten Jagdpanzer. You could use them to devastate whole teams because there was no countermeasures to them. So the fact that they're talking about countermeasures here and also control systems, that is really nice. I'm very happy that we've gone forward after about 3 or 4 years of just adding systems that are insane. Now, it would be nice if this was thought towards stuff like thermals and also stuff such as night vision, but baby steps. The fact is, when it comes to the idea of anti-ship missiles, I think it's an inevitability. I think it's the same as mines. It's just the only case is, do you add them in as their own separate bracket, or do you let them mingle with ships which do not have any countermeasures to them? Because one of the big reasons why stuff like battleships and battlecruisers very much fell out of favor is the same reason why stuff such as large heavy bombers fell out of favor. You could make something which was faster and smaller, which could carry exactly the same payload at a much cheaper cost, and also it would be a lot more efficient to do so. So instead, you have these anti-missile either frigates or destroyers of the modern day, which are much more effective than the old school battleships because they outrange them, they have much better radar systems, and they can defend themselves against stuff that is coming in. So for me, I definitely think that it will become part of the game. The only question is, how will it mingle with the pre-existing parts of the game and how it will work out. We've already seen that you can now shoot down ATGMs from the air. We also know that you can shoot down bombs and stuff like that. So therefore, there is really nice precedent for being able to shoot down these anti-ship missiles, and I'm sure that will be used to great effect. I'm just hoping that there is thought put towards, mixing them with pre-existing vehicles which can't deal with them. I'm sure there won't be, because of the fact that we've seen so many mechanics added which have screwed with the current meta and things like that in increasingly negative ways. Helicopters, as I said, thermal imaging, ATGMs when they were added, smoke grenades was kind of nice, stuff such as APFSDS when that was added as well. Just all of these things, it is, if you look at it just from a long-term holistic point of view, it is power on power on power, and in ship combat, the anti-ship missile is the ultimate power. The next question is it possible to make sure that on a ship from the destroyer class and above, it would be possible to take control over a group of the required for target main caliber turrets? That's hard to say. For example, on one side of the ship, and all other turrets remained in their original positions. So recently, we changed the aiming algorithm of the turrets from one side to another, and now all the turrets attempt to hold the maximum possible number of barrels in the direction of the sights. It looks to us that this is a rather convenient implementation of a multi-turreted vehicle control. It is quite difficult to point out those turrets that will not take part in the battle, because the ship usually maneuvers and turrets that cannot be pointed at the target and will be able to shoot at it after a small turn of the hull. Such situations happen constantly. Okay? I mean, I don't understand why any of this is to do with the question. It cannot be hard to have set groups of turrets. We had this problem when Naval first came out, when people were talking about how they wanted more control over the guns that they were using when it came to their not just primary, secondary, and auxiliary armaments. They wanted to be able to control specific guns with specific groups, but Gaijin said no to that, and they should just say no here and just say why. But instead we have this, which is trying to say that it already exists. I don't know. That's very odd. Once again, struggling to answer the question. The last question is, will there be a similar rework to bombs which was given to rockets in recent years? Specifically, as an example, AP bombs, such as the Japanese ones, are not really useful, and a rework may give them more of a purpose in the game. The answer, yes, we have such plans, as well as the implementation of the mechanics of kinetic penetration of armor-piercing bombs, which becomes relevant with the implementation of larger ships in the game. Wonderful. So that is obviously a great thing to hear. I personally have been looking forward to a bomb rework for a long time, not just for naval, but also for ground, and even aerialistic. I think the bombs could definitely benefit from the ideas of, armor and working out how it all works. And maybe it's just a lot harder to do than rockets, but it seemed like rockets were changed pretty quickly after the ideas of them becoming overpowered, especially in ground, were, kind of shown. So for me, it's nice to see that that is happening. I hope in the future we see that very soon. It's something I wished that would come out this year, but I'm guessing it will come in the years to come. But at any point, to know that it's being worked on is just great to hear. Anyway, so these questions overall were pretty good. Some of these answers, not so good. Some of them just completely dodging the question. And it is how it is when it is these Q&As. It's still, over the last month or so, we've been given a ton of information about the future of War Thunder, which is great, and this only adds to it. It's just, I suppose that this Q&A was a little bit more disappointing compared to those other interviews, but I think overall, adding to it is still good overall. So, once again, thank you for BVVD for sitting down and answering these questions. Thank you to the people who, sorted them out. And as always, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd just like to thank Ambrosius McClellan, B. Young, Blackie, Daniel Stanton, Jay Wilt, John Ryman, Joseph Anders, Martinez, Moxie, Super Cacti, Uyins Terry, Elove Goat, and Seductive Trashcan for supporting the channel.